Hello everyone, I'm Darcy Bono, and in this video we're going to take a look at painting the Wolf Scouts from the new Kill Team Dead Silence, and in this case I painted them as a recent successor chapter to the Space Wolves, known as the Wolf Spear. And like their founding chapter, they are masters of the hunt, they're relentless in pursuing their quarry, but unlike the Space Wolves, who are boisterous and pretty broy, the Wolf Spear are known for being much more taciturn and quiet and just have this very brooding stalker type presence that I thought would be very fitting for Kill Team Dead Silence. So before we even get to painting, I did want to share something really important as far as what comes in the kit and what you're able to build versus what is allowed in the rules. So the very first miniature you come to, it tells you to choose between either a pack leader or the Frost Eye, the sniper for your kill team. Even though in the rules, it shows that you can have both of them. You choose 5 human operatives. You can't have multiples of these except the hunters. Those are just the generic fighters. But you can have one of each specialist type, basically, within that 5-man team. So I did want both of these because I thought they looked really cool. And the way I went around it was I actually used the body from the gunner operative because the pose was really similar. And he was also the most generic looking. He just looks like your standard Phobos armored space marine. So here's the Frost Eye I made using the gunner's body and then just all the other bits from the Frost Eye. It's a pretty spot-on match. And then that way I still had the body for my pack leader, so I could have both of those. So in a nutshell, the kit gives you 5 bodies, but there's 6 specialist operatives. So if you want to be able to build your gunner, in addition to any hunters, the generic fighters, you're going to want to use Phobos armor space marines like incursors or infiltrators. They just won't have the pelts on their backpacks. So the second thing to be aware of with this kit is that it only comes with one backpack between your rune priest and your pack leader. This is the pack leader here. It's got the ×1. It's got an exclamation point showing, hey, you only have one backpack that these guys can use, which again says you can choose between your pack leader or your rune priest, even though the rules say you can field both of them at the same time. So here is how I got around that. Here we have the pelts for both the pack leader and the rune priest. The pack leaders is on the left, the rune priest is on the right, and then there's the exclusive backpack. So the way this works is that each pelt has a armor panel attached to it, and it sits into the slot of the backpack. Now, I'm going to give this one to the rune priest just because that little skull there attached to the ring is going to make it kind of hard to give it an easy, just snipped off transition. So the pack leader's pelt has a much more defined cut here area. It's going to be a lot easier just to snip off where that little rectangle ring part begins. So we're going to cut right here and basically cut this panel off and create a concave surface inside of here. And I'm going to be placing this over top of one of the backpacks from one of the more generic fighters. Now I am going to snip off that gem and file it down smoothly so it fits much better over top. So I'm just taking my nippers and cutting off this section here, and as you can see the panel goes very far back into the fur segment. So what you're going to have to do is take a hobby knife and just kind of carve that part out. I did it off screen for my safety because I didn't want to look at a camera and handle a knife at the same time. Then I took a sheet of sandpaper. This is 800 grit. You can pick this up at any hardware store that sells house painting supplies. So rolled this into a cylinder essentially so I can get in there and make a more concave surface and smooth it down until it was able to fit over the different backpack. So this actually does fit pretty well on its own over this different backpack. There is a slight gap. It's mostly only visible from the sides, but I did end up sculpting a fur trim border just for a more natural transition. I did this using green stuff, and we're not going to get into that in this video because I'm not an expert at it by any means, and there are tons of fur sculpting videos out there already. Now that we've got all the assembly stuff out of the way, let's get to painting. Just to clarify, this is one of the Phobos armor space marines I mentioned that I used to create just a generic hunter. So this is the body of an infiltrator, but the arms and the future head are from the kill team itself. I did it this way just because I was already batch painting the kill team for a Warhammer community article, so they were already in the works when I decided, you know what, this is actually a pretty easy paint scheme, I'm going to shoot a tutorial. So the first thing I did was prime the miniature using Grey Seer. You're also going to want Grey Seer, the base paint, just for a touch-up paint. Anywhere that you make a mistake, you'll be able to easily patch it up using the base coat of Grey Seer as it matches the primer perfectly. Speaking of which, we are going to paint every single thing except the gray armor first. Anytime you have a high contrast color scheme where there is a light color surrounded by dark colors, always do the dark colors first. It's much harder to make a correction when you've accidentally put a dark color on a light surface than it is the other way around. And this is especially important since we're going to be creating a kind of gradient on our white-gray armor. And so that gradient is even harder to correct when you misplace dark. It's harder to make it look more like a natural blend again when you've got a dark splotch on your light surface. So we're going to start by painting surfaces we know are going to be solid black. And I want to emphasize the solid black part because Wolf Spear, they are known for having these really cool striking red, white, and black markings. They indicate the Jarldom, the veteran status, and they're just like a really cool design and one of my favorite things about them. However, if you paint your pauldrons and your knee pads all black first, you're going to have a very hard time painting a vibrant red and white over top of that black surface. So anywhere that you plan on having red and white markings, do not paint that black. I'm going to show you how to do that after we do our solid black surfaces like the pauldron with the emblem on it and the vents on the backpack. I'm going to show you two different ways of painting black. The first is a blue black using contrast paint, and the second is a neutral black using traditional acrylic paint. Now, I'm mainly just using black Templar due to its color. It's a nice teal black, so I don't really care so much about its contrast properties. This is 3 drops of black Templar thinned a little bit with 1 drop of Lahmian Medium. This is going to allow you to smooth the paint a little bit more easily. We're not going to do my Lahmian Medium trick. If you've seen my previous videos on smoothing out contrast paints, we don't need that in this case because we're going to be applying 2 layers of this paint. I'm essentially just base coating with it at this point, so the actual contrast transparent properties are going to come in later. So this is what it looks like after 2 coats of black Templar have completely dried. So this is the black Templar right here on this side. As you can see, it's much more bluish hued than this. This is Abaddon black. This is more of a warm black. If you thin Abaddon black, it actually looks quite brown. But with an opaque base, it's kind of more of a neutral black. So we're going to increase kind of the bluish saturation and intensity of this here, as well as take the splotchiness out. All we're going to do is dry brush and stipple using Fenrisian Grey, and we're going to use a small makeup brush in order to do this. And this will make perfect sense in just a sec. This rounded tip is perfect for stippling and dry brushing a smooth gradient. So like with any dry brushing, get most of the paint off your brush, test your pattern beforehand, and then lightly brush this over the most raised portions in a somewhat circular motion. And as you'll see, it'll catch just the very top of the spheres of these knee pads while still retaining the darker recesses. Now, this obviously looks very stark and dusty, but bear with me, it's going to make sense in the final step. When it comes to rounded, like very spherical shapes like this vent here, lightly stipple it. It's lightly jabbing at it and then following up with that circular dry brush motion, and you'll get a much more subtle color gradient on top of these more spherical shapes. All right, the final step, all we're going to do is apply a glaze of black Templar again. This is going to look initially like it's overdoing it and oversaturating our highlights. Once it dries, it will not look quite so dark. Now, at this point, we're going to do the Lahmian Medium trick. This is straight up Lahmian Medium, just applying a layer of it onto the most spherical parts. And then this is our glaze of black Templar. We're applying that, rinsing our brush, and then lightly moving that around. So that way that underlayer still shows through. The Lahmian Medium allows the paint to diffuse, as well as you to be able to wipe it away more easily. So coming in for the pauldron, this is again Lahmian Medium, just straight Lahmian Medium over top of this. And then here's our black Templar glaze. I'm applying it pretty thoroughly here, and then I'm just going to rinse my brush, come back in with a damp brush, and lightly wipe it away on the portions I want to be the brightest. And that is what it looks like when it's completely dried, which I think looks great considering all we did was base coat, dry brush, glaze. That's it. Now keep in mind, we're going to have a decal over this, so if yours doesn't end up perfect, it's really okay. But that is how you paint a bluish black that will contrast beautifully with any of the warmer colors on the leathers and pouches and pelts. Now, if you want to do an optional edge highlight, you can always just mix in Fenrisian Grey incrementally with black Templar. You don't need to buy a different gray for this. So there's no set ratio. It just depends on how bright you want your edge highlights to be. So I just eyeball it, honestly, until I get to a light bluish gray, just because I found just straight Fenrisian on its own was a little bit too stark. And if you mess up and you think that you made your edge highlights a little bit too fat and you need to go back in and correct it, you know how you got to the blackish blue color. So all you have to do is mix in just the tiniest speck of Fenrisian Grey into your Black Templar until it's a dark, dark bluish charcoal, and then just use it to trim down the edge highlight. Okay, so that was how to paint a cool blue black. Now we're going to look at a very quick way of painting a neutral black. So this black you're looking at here is Abaddon black. It's just a base coat. That's all there is to it. We're next going to highlight this using Corvus black. And we're actually going to be using the exact same technique before, in which we take a small rounded tip concealer brush and stipple our Corvus black, which is a deep charcoal color, over top the most rounded portions of the armor. And just to clarify, it is a stipple dry brush kind of combination. You stipple the very highest pinpoints of the highlight, and the more subtle gradients, you're going to want to just do a traditional dry brush. And then I'm just going to edge highlight using Corvus black mixed with incremental amounts of Corax white, which we're going to be using later on our grayish white armor anyway. There's no sense in going out and buying another gray just for an edge highlight color. You can simply just lighten the one that you already have used. So that is how you paint two different versions of black armor. Choose whichever one that you prefer. Next, we're going to really quickly see how to paint those red and white markings against the black armor. So since I used the other pauldron in order to show you the second version of black, and I need something I can paint white over easily, this is a different miniature. So all I did for this step was base coat this pauldron in a bright white. In this case, I'm using Pro Acryl Bold Titanium White. And for our bright red markings, I'm using Vallejo Scarlett Blood Red. It is a very intense eye-searing red that is perfect for these vibrant markings. And I'm just taking my time, resting my wrist against the handle of my painting handle. And this will really help with brush control. So just take your time. Really, the only thing that should be moving are your fingers. So rest the hand holding the miniature on the desk, and then prop your painting hand against that wrist. And I'm actually going to be making these stripes quite a bit wider than I want the end result to be. And the reason for that is because I'm going to be painting black right next to them. So I don't have to run the risk of getting black on the perfect width of stripe. What I can do is use the black to just trim down the red until I'm satisfied. You might notice the white has a weird little line on it, and that's because I was going to paint some grunge on the white, and then I decided against it, so like partially wiped it away. I'll just touch it up later. It's no big deal. But this black is Black Templar. And that is the trick to doing red, white, and black all on the same surface. Do your white first, then do your red, and then do your black last. And the reason for this is because it is very difficult to achieve a smooth, opaque white and a vibrant red once you've already painted a black surface. Now we're going to paint the inlay of the suit, also using Black Templar. This is straight from the pot. You don't need to thin this, as this is a very textured surface. It sinks in and highlights it just fine. So just apply Black Templar contrast to the power armor interior. Alright, with the black components out of the way, we're going to move on to the leather. And all I'm doing for this is applying Gorgrunta Fur contrast straight out of the pot. There's really nothing to this. It's a nice burnt brown orange color that's going to contrast very nicely with our blue black. Now, if you would like to deepen this color just a little bit, you can always mix in Cygor Brown. It's a dark reddish brown mahogany color. So this is 2 drops Gorgrunta Fur, 1 drop Cygor Brown. As you can see, it's a little bit more intense, has a little bit more of a reddish brown hue to it. So just another option for your leather. Once that's dried, you can then use Skrag Brown as an edge highlight to further increase the definition and vibrancy on the edges of these pouches. So then for the gauntlets, all I did to get a rich oxblood color was mix Cygor Brown, Flesh Tearers Red, and Lahmian Medium all in an even ratio. Now, do not skimp on the Lahmian Medium because Cygor Brown and Flesh Tearers Red are very dense. Even though they're contrast paints, they're easily some of the thickest in the contrast range. And while I'm talking about medium, the reason I use Lahmian Medium instead of contrast medium is that I find that it makes the paint flow even more than contrast medium does. Contrast medium makes it thinner and more transparent, but it doesn't seem to really affect how it flows. So Lahmian Medium thins the paint, increases transparency, but I feel like also increases fluidity, which makes it a lot easier to spread around smoothly. And once the contrast paint has dried, our optional highlight color is Tuskgor Fur. This is just lightly picking out the edges, lightly picking out the wrinkles in the gloves just to give it a little bit more definition. Again, this is completely optional. It just makes it pop a little bit more. So before moving on to the white armor, paint everything except your metallic surfaces. I'm laying down black as the foundation for my future metallic surfaces, but I'm not painting them yet because I apply a matte varnish after my white-gray armor is complete. This will also seal on the decals better as well. So I'm applying a matte varnish later in the process, and you don't want to have your metallics already done. Otherwise, they're going to be very flat and muted if you apply a matte varnish over metallics. And speaking of which, we're not going to get to the weapons in this video because most of the operatives don't even have these weapons. It's just for the hunters, the generic fighters that most people probably aren't going to field. And I wanted this video to focus on components that are shared amongst the whole kill team. All right, we're finally ready to make that off-white slight gray armor. If you've seen my painting white video, this is just a slight variation of that. What we're going to do is work in sections to make this a little more manageable and to give you time to feather out your shading. So all I'm doing is applying straight Lahmian Medium to this leg. And as I said in the painting black section, this allows the paint to just instantly diffuse upon contact, and the wet surface is going to allow you more time to spread out your shade and saturation wherever you want it to go rather than having it stick to a dry miniature. So just apply a thin layer of Lahmian Medium, don't completely douse it, and then immediately, while this is still wet, apply a mixture of 3 drops Soulblight Grey and 1 drop Drakenhoff Nightshade. And as soon as you apply it to the wet surface, you'll see it diffuse and start to run more into the recesses. You can also just focus it on the recesses if you want, just lightly touching it to the most recessed portions. But in this case, I'm not being too careful with it. You can always use a damp brush to wipe away areas you want to be brighter or areas that are slightly oversaturated while this paint is still wet. This is again where that Lahmian Medium wet surface comes in handy so the paint doesn't stick to the dry surface and come up in patches. And I also prefer Lahmian Medium instead of water, simply because water, while it does provide a wet surface, it actually causes the paint to run a little too much. I find it to be a little more uncontrollable when you use water instead. So that's why I prefer Lahmian Medium for this. And as far as other foreseeable substitution questions, some of you might be wondering, can I just use Apothecary White Contrast? And yes, you absolutely can. However, they're just different colors. This has a little bit more of a blue-gray hue to it, whereas Apothecary White has more of a greenish-gray hue, and it just did not look like wolf spear armor to me. So this is what it looks like with the shading all applied. As you can see, the neck area is still drying, but everywhere else is dry, and I think that honestly looks pretty great considering how little effort we put into that. So you can honestly stop there if you want, but if you want to add a bit more detail, a bit more contrast, we're actually going to add a recess shade. And all I'm doing for this is just lining the deepest recesses using a mixture of 1 drop Basilicanum Grey with 2 drops of Drakenhoff Nightshade. You can use just Nuln oil if you want, but I found that it just wasn't quite saturated enough. It didn't seem to give it quite enough definition. You can also use Space Wolves Grey, but it will give it way more of a blue hue to your armor. And just to make this armor look a little bit more crisp, again, this is totally optional, you can add a fine edge highlight using Corax White just to the sharpest edges. All right, we are almost done entirely with all the components of this kill team, except I forgot a very important and iconic one, how to paint the pelts. So this is the Rune Priest with his infamous backpack, and I've base coated this using the same bright white, pro acryl, bold titanium white. This will help my ivory and cream colors in the pelt pop a little bit more than if I used gray Seer for the base. And for my pelts, I kind of just make it up as I go along, but that was a drop of Basilicanum Grey, and then I add about 3 drops of Skeleton Horde Contrast. This is going to turn it into kind of almost like a khaki brown color. It's going to be a very desaturated gray brown, and once you put this over white, it gives you more of a cream bone color. I actually use this combination for my bones quite a bit if you've seen my other videos. I also use just a little drop of Lahmian Medium on my palette and gradually just mix it in, just so this is super transparent, because we want that white underlayer to show through, and that's what's going to create our ivory color, is the white showing through this yellow-brown glaze. So all I do is just kind of line the furthest edges of the pelt, because usually on a wolf, that's where the lighter portion is. They usually have more saturated grays and even blacks up on their back. So I just apply this mixture along the edges, keeping it out of the center, because we're next going to apply Basilicanum Grey. Now this has been substantially thinned. This is about 1 drop Basilicanum Grey with 2 drops of Lahmian Medium, and I'm actually applying it while our original shade of ivory is still wet, and that's going to create a nice natural blend. It'll kind of bleed into it a little bit, but if you look at wolf pelts in nature, some of them do have somewhat linear patterns, so you can honestly just do whatever you want, but these are the main colors I use for my pelts. And just for fun, to show you what you can do with this, I'm actually adding just a tiny blotch of Black Templar over top of that Basilicanum Grey while it's still wet. This will turn the cooler Black Templar into a more brown black and just give it a little bit more of a natural color tone, as well as creating just some contrast between the light underpelt and then the top part that would be the shoulders of the wolf. So that is how to paint the color scheme of the successor chapter known as Wolf Spear, as well as the components of the Wolf Scouts in Kill Team Dead Silence. Now, I didn't cover the face in this video for obvious reasons because it's got a lot more to it and the videos are already quite long. So if you want to check out how to paint faces, how to do skin tones very easily without obscuring your miniature's detail, I already have a brief video on that. It'll show you 3 different skin tones that you can use to paint faces. And since none of these operatives come with a helmeted version, unfortunately, I am also working on a video that will show how to paint eyes and lips and the more finer details on a face with as little headache as possible. So if you're interested in that video and want to know when it comes out, make sure to like, subscribe, hit the notification button, and if you'd like to support the channel and my work as an artist and the effort I put into these videos, you can go shopping at any of the affiliate links listed in the video description. So thanks very much for watching today. I really appreciate your time, and until we meet again, happy painting, everyone.